Hello everyone, this is the 32nd question of my database management systems practical video series. Without further ado, let's go to our question list here. Under day 18, here's the question 32. But before go to this question, let's go to the previous question. In the previous video, we created a database and create some tables or relations inside that database. If you can remember, these tables are related to storing the user details like the main user table, the gender table, user type table, and system login like that, addresses and cities like that. We created those tables, and in the question 32, we are going to continue this question and create other tables. Here you can see in the previous video we didn't mention the relationships. We didn't set those relationships between these tables. I think we have to establish those relationships in a future video. So let's go to our new question 32, and here's the question 32 and continue our question. If you didn't watch the previous video, I recommend you to watch the video and come to this video, because otherwise you will not understand the question. Okay, this is the same context in question 32. I'm not going to read that again. Let's create these tables. But before creating these tables, I like to explain why we are creating these tables. You know why we created the previous tables, the user tables, to store the details related to the user's details. And in this question, here's the first one: create a product table to store product informations. To do so, use the instructions below. Okay, here now we have to create a new table called product. In this table, we are going to store the details of the products, the products which sell in our store, and here are the attributes. First one is product ID. You can see the product ID will be the primary key, and also it should be auto incremented. You know how to set these values, and as the primary key we can identify a specific item using this unique product ID. Okay, and here's the product name and the description. Okay, so let's create this table first. I'm going to go to the Workbench software. Here we are in the Workbench software, and let's go into our connection. Okay, now we are in our MySQL database management server. Let's open the previous model. We created a ER diagram. I saved that model in my desktop. Let's go to files and press open model. Here, this is the database RLEDB. Let's open this one. Okay, now this is the ER diagram we created in the previous video. You can see the tables, user, system login, address like that. Now we are going to update this ER diagram with new tables. Okay, now let's create our new table called product. I'm going to click on the place a new table button here, and then click somewhere in the free area, and now we can right click on that table and edit this one. Okay, now we can change the name of the table. I'm changing the name to product, and here's the first one, product ID. Okay, we added our first attribute, product ID, and you can see by default it's the primary key. Let's check the auto increment option here. Okay, now this product ID will be auto incremented when we add new records. Let's go to our question and add other attributes. Here's the next attribute, product name. We have to change the data type to varchar, and it will store string values in the cells, and we have to set the default character length to 45, so it will store a character length of 45 in a single cell. Okay, let's go to our Workbench software again, and let's add this attribute, product name. You can see by default it's varchar and character length is 45. I'm going to check the not null option here, and let's assign our next attribute, description, and now this time the data type will be text, and character length is 100. I think I didn't explain what is the text data type will do. it's going to store words. In varchar, it's going to store characters, a single character, and it will store up to 45 characters in a single cell. But in with this data type text, let me check that one. Let me find that one here. This is the data type text, and by default it will store words. This time it will store up to 100 words, not characters. It will store 100 words in the product description. Okay, let's change the name to description. Okay, now we completed the product table here. Okay, let's go to our question and go to the second part. Create a table called brand to store product brands. To do so, use the instructions below. Okay, now there's another new table called product. We use this table to store the names of the brands. There can be products with different kind of brands. The products will come under brand names. So they can be the same product with different brands. Like a biscuit, there can be different brands but the same biscuit. So for those purposes, to identify those products specifically, we can create these kind of tables. So the brand table will store the details of the brand, like brand name, and we can link that brand to the product. Okay, let's create this one. It's as the same. Brand ID is the primary key and it will be auto incremented, and the brand name, it's going to store string values. That's why the data type is varchar. Okay, let's create this table too. Edit table 1, and I'm changing the name to brand. Okay, let's set the first attribute brand ID, and it will be auto incremented, and it's also the primary key. Okay, and the brand name is going to store string values, and I'm going to check the not null option here. Okay, we completed the second table here. Let's separate these two tables. Okay, these are the tables of the user details, to store user details, and these tables will store the information related to products. Okay, let's go to the third part here. Create a table called GRN to store bill details provided by suppliers when selling inventory to the store. To do so, use the instructions below. Okay, this is a special table. GRN means goods received note. We use these kinds of good received notes to mention the suppliers, what are the products we need and how much quantity we need from those products. And with the GRN note, when the suppliers supply those items to our shop or to the inventory, they will give their bills related to the product and the quantity and the price of that goods. Okay, so those kind of details will be stored in this GRN table, and that's the purpose of this one. And let's create this one. This is another table like brand, GRN ID, and GRN date. This time in this attribute it will store a date. Here you can see the data type as date time, and this will store the date and also the time of this bill received. Okay, let's go back here and create our new table. Okay, GRN, this is the table, and let's create our first attribute GRN ID, and it will be auto incremented on, and also the primary key and the GRN date. Let's go to our question and verify the name. Yes, GRN date. The data type is date time. So when we set the data type to date time, when we record GRN date, it will only accept a value with date and also the time. Okay, let's select the data type, date time. Here you can see this is the date time data type, and let's check the not null option. Okay, we created the third table And let's go to our question and go to the fourth one. Create a table called GRN item to store the information about the quantities of goods supplied to the store by suppliers. To do so, use the instructions below. Okay, in the previous table, the GRN table, we store the ID of the GRN bill and also the date received that bill. And in this table, we are going to create a separate table to store the informations of what are the goods came with those suppliers and how much quantity and the price and also the selling price. Here you can see the attributes, quantity, unit price and selling price. And the data type, quantity will store in integers. Quantity quantity values should store in integers without floating points. And also the unit price, that's the price of the products which will come to the store, and the store will sell those products with some added value, and that's the selling price. Okay, those two prices will store as double here in the data type double. What this data type do, it will allow the user to store numerical values with floating points. We can't use integers here because the price can be stored with floating points. Okay, that's what this table do, and let's create this table quickly. This is the GRN item table. Okay, let's create a new table here and right click edit table, and I'm going to change the name to GRN item. First one is quantity. Here you can see there are no any primary keys because these two tables are going to store details of the good received node. Okay, so there will be a relationship between these two tables, like GRN ID will fall into this GRN item table like that. We don't know that relationship. We are not going to establish that relationship in this video. And let's go to our Workbench software and create our attributes here. Unit attribute will store data type with integers as integers, and the unit price and the selling price will be double. Okay, quantity, and it's by default it's in integer form. And here's the next one, quantity price, unit price here, unit price. Let's change the data type to double here. You will understand what these data types will do when we add values or add records into these tables. So let's create the next attribute here, selling price, and let's change the data type to double again. Okay, and check the not null option here, and we completed the GRN item table. Let's go to our question, and here's the question 5. Create a table called stock to store information about the quantities of items currently available for sale in the store. To do so, use the instructions below. Okay, here you can see this table will be updated every time. In the context, you can see this stock table. We have to create this stock table to store information about the quantities of items currently available in this time available in the sale. So when someone buy an item, this table will be updated. And here you can see, using this GRN item table and the stock table, we can calculate the difference between how many items were sold from the store, and we can find that number using the information recorded in these two tables. That's why we store we use these separate tables here. Okay, let's go to our Workbench software. Before that, here are the attributes, stock ID, and that's the primary key, and also it will be auto incremented with data type. Here it's integer, and the quantity is also integer, and the selling price is double. Okay, I explained why we use these data types with quantities and selling prices. I'm not going to explain that again. Let's go to our Workbench software. But before creating this table, I like to highlight something. Here in the GRN item table, you can see we can set a default value to this unit price and selling price here, like that, like this here. 0.00 like this. If one of these attributes will not built by the user, this default value will be added to these fields. Okay, we can add a value like this, so it will change the value stored in unit price and the selling price to 0 when a user didn't add a value by themselves. Okay, let's create our new table. Here, let's edit this one and change the name to stock. And let's create the first attribute, stock ID. And it will be auto incremented and also the primary key. Okay. And this is the next one, quantity and the selling price. Okay. QTY means the quantity, and it will store values as integers, and other part is selling price. Okay. We don't have to record the unit price here again, because it's already stored in the GRN item table. And if the selling price was changed, we can find the difference using the selling price stored in the GRN table and the stock table. Okay, let's change this to double. Now we completed the stock table too. Okay, let's go to our question again. Here, this is the question 6. Create a table called invoice to store the bill details provided to the customer when purchasing goods from the store. To do so, use the instructions below. This is another type of a table. In the previous tables, the GRN table is for the suppliers. When they supply goods, this table will store how much quantity and the price, like that. And in this table, the invoice table, these details will be stored related to the customer. When they purchase items, we can generate an invoice and give the details to the customer, and also we can keep those details in the table too. So let's go to our Workbench software. But before that, here you can see there are two attributes, invoice ID and the date. And in the last part of the question, you can see there's another table called invoice item to store the item details of the invoice table. So that's these two tables are same as the GRN table. So let's create this table first, invoice table. Okay, here add new table, right click and edit table 1 and change this name to invoice. And first attribute is invoice ID, and it's the primary key, and also it will be auto incremented, and the data type is integer, and invoice date. Let's go to our question and verify that. Here you can see it's date. Okay, date, and the data type is date time. Okay, I'm going to check the not null option, and we completed the invoice table here. Now let's go to the last part of this question. Create a table called invoice item to store the details of the goods given to the customer after purchasing the goods from the store. To do so, use the instructions below. Okay, here in this part there are two attributes, invoice item ID and quantity. So using this quantity, we can find how much amount from the product was purchased by the customer, and we can find the selling price using the values stored in the stock table, and the unit price stored in the GRN table, and we can calculate how much profit we make from those purchases and what is the amount of the customer's bill. We can generate that bill using the selling price in the stock table and the quantity in the invoice item table. Okay, now let's create our invoice item table. Let's go to Workbench and create new table, edit table 1 and change the name to invoice item, and the first attribute name is the invoice item ID, and it is the primary key and also it should be auto incremented. Okay, let's go to our question and find the next attribute here, quantity, and it's in integer format. Okay, qty, and let's change the data type to integer and check the not null option. We can also set a default value to this quantity in the invoice item table as 1. So if the user didn't enter a specific quantity, the quantity always will be 1. Here we completed the tables related to the details of the products sell in our store. And I think that's it for this video. We completed the question 32. Thank you very much for watching.